Sometime after the first encounter, Crow Team signed a deal with Take-Two Interactive. As they were busy finishing the second encounter, one of Take-Two's brands, Global Star Software, hired Climax Studios sometime in 2002 to work on two new entries into the Serious Sam series. One was Next Encounter, a follow-up to Crow Team's formula developed for the GameCube and the PlayStation 2, released in April of 2004. The other was a brand new first-person shooter for the Game Boy Advance, released on the same day, simply titled Serious Sam Advance. The story takes place after the first encounter, with the Syrian ship leaving for who knows where and Sam using the time lock to return to his own time for a well-deserved rest. As the years went by, scientists discovered how to use the time lock to its full potential, allowing them to set arbitrary dates and destinations. And so, exploration teams were assembled to discover more of the Earth's past, and to learn if Mental had been trying to alter history. One day, the exploration teams stopped returning, and so it was decided that it was time to send Sam back to the past once again, this time to ancient Rome. But the game actually starts in Egypt again, with Rome showing up in the second half of the game, which doesn't take long to reach. The game has 12 levels, but they can't be too big given the hardware limitations, so all of them can be completed in less than 10 minutes each. As usual, you run around collecting pickups like health and ammo, while trying to find the Ankh at the end of each level and dealing with enemies that get in your way. The layouts themselves are all quite simple, not consisting of much beyond corridors and 90-degree corners. The game uses a technique called ray casting, similar to early 90s shooters like Wolfenstein 3D and classic Doom. So while it looks like 3D, it's more like 2.5D. Unlike in those games, enemies that aren't placed on ground level require vertical auto-aim to hit. Still, the developers packed some secrets to discover in each level, and classic-styled Netrixa is also here, giving you information about each level as well as enemies and weapons. Some of them were lifted from the encounters, with their 3D models adapted into sprites to fit the system's capabilities, but most enemies are completely new and have never again showed up in the series. Most of the weapons though aren't original. You start with the chainsaw, but pick up the Colt revolver right away. Like its original iteration, it has infinite ammo and high accuracy, but here it doesn't need to be reloaded, although you also can't dual-wield them. Only the double-barreled shotgun is present, but you do get both the Tommy gun and the minigun for bullet spam. However, they both use their own ammo instead of sharing it like in the encounters. The grenade launcher also isn't present, and the rocket launcher serves as your main explosive weapon. The classic arsenal ends with the cannon, whose balls now ignore gravity while bouncing around, instead of behaving like they do in the mainline series. There's no knife or laser gun equivalent here, but Advance does have 3 completely new weapons of its own. Well, 2.5 actually. The Rogue Prion gun kinda sorta looks like the classic sniper rifle, but it's nothing like it. It fires an energy shot that confuses enemies rather than hurt them, causing them to attack other enemies. Next is the Time Strike, the coolest weapon in the game. It records the location and time of the targeted enemy, and then when Sam comes back home, he gives the data to his scientist buddies, who then use that information to drop some props on that enemy. In other words, it drops pianos on enemies. Finally, the unidirectional microwave transmitter shares the flamethrower design for some reason, but it functions as a super weapon that fires a projectile that explodes everything in the area. Unfortunately, there's barely any ammo for it, but it only shows up halfway through the last level anyway. So far so good based on what I say, but if you've been paying any attention to how it looks, you've probably noticed that this game has problems. Let's be clear here. This is not a good game, and I don't recommend playing it unless you enjoy self-flagellation. Serious Sam Advance has the reputation for being terrible, and well, it is. But I'd like to think that this wasn't just a cynical shovelware spin-off, because there was effort put into adapting the style of the classic encounters into a portable format. It's just that it was horribly mishandled, and the end result is borderline unplayable. It should be obvious that developing a first-person shooter for a system such as the Game Boy Advance is a giant handicap, and it was never going to work perfectly with something like Serious Sam, a series known for its large areas and hordes of enemies. And since both Advance and Next Encounter had the same release date, the studio was working simultaneously on two different games for two vastly different platforms. Next Encounter might have problems, but it's pretty obvious which of the two got priority. The poor frame rate, the awkward targeting system, and some little things that I'm assuming are just oversights all combined together to form one spectacular train wreck. You've probably already noticed that the game runs like a snail. It reaches maybe 25 FPS when you're looking at a wall, but otherwise it sits at 15 on a good day and single digits on the rest. In fairness, I can appreciate the technology on display here. The wall textures are detailed, and the levels have a decent amount of geometry. But maybe it should have been dialed back so the game could run at a playable frame rate rather than the PowerPoint on display here. And when other shooters on the same hardware look and run better, even my armchair expert brain tells me something is wrong. This amplifies the second main problem, which is the targeting system. It seems like enemies need to be registered by the crosshair for your shots to actually work, and the weapons don't seem to function like you'd expect. For example, the shotgun functions more like a rifle, firing a single powerful shot. But targeting enemies is kind of hard when the aiming is already jerky on its own, and the frame rate is in the single digits. And I say that it seems like this is how it works because I'm not really sure, since the Tommy gun and minigun can carve through multiple enemies without much problem. In fact, their fast rate of fire makes them the easiest weapons to use by far. Advance obviously doesn't have the same amount of enemies that the mainline entries have, but later levels do have a lot, so you will be relying on these two weapons a lot, and you will never bother with things like the time strike since they require precision, and precision is something you don't get. Sure, you can hold the B button to slow down your aiming, but doing that gets you roasted harder than an Arby's sandwich. You also can't strafe while doing this because B plus L or R cycles through your weapons. Speaking of which, when you're switching weapons backwards you have to hold the B button until the animation finishes, or else the game will cycle back to the previous weapon for some reason. And for what I assume are technical reasons, rockets seem to move together with the player instead of moving straight ahead from the position they were launched from. And if you play above tourist difficulty, you'll quickly notice that they had the genius idea of also increasing enemy health significantly, so much that even a kamikaze can survive a double-barreled shotgun blast. The best part of the final product is probably the music, but even that wasn't left unscathed. According to Matt Simmons, the composer, the original versions had to be dialed back since the graphics were eating up so many resources. If you're curious, check out the original versions on his SoundCloud. Besides the single player, there's also 4-player deathmatch if you really have to. That's something, I guess. Regardless, despite agreeing with the game's reputation for being kinda trash, I do think that some parts of the game are actually pretty alright or even good. There's secrets, there's Netrixa, and although they're pretty simplistic, the levels do look detailed and work fine given the limitations of the Game Boy Advance. Seriously, if Serious Sam was released back in the early 90s as a 2.5D shooter, this is more or less how I would expect it to look like. I even tried MGBA's high-resolution mode to see if it would work on this game, but alas, it doesn't. But despite the effort, Serious Sam Advance isn't very good, and in fact its technical problems render it borderline unplayable. Give it a shot if you're curious, but you'll probably give up after a few minutes. But hey, at least Climax is still alive and kicking, even after changing their name multiple times. The same can't be said for Global Star Software. They ceased to exist in 2007, when they were absorbed into 2K Play, Take-Two Interactive's new casual game brand, which some might argue is a fate worse than death.